Welcome back to Fatal Files. I'm Nathan Cole. Today, I got 5 cases of Karens whose egos were so massive that they ended up costing lives. From the coupon clipping Karen who caused a deadly crowd crush, to a petty bus argument that ended with a passenger stumbling into the one thing she never saw coming. It was December 19, 2015 in Schaumburg, Illinois, and freezing rain had already started coating the parking lots outside the shopping centers near a mall. Inside a crowded beauty store that was only minutes from closing, exhausted holiday shoppers rushed through the aisles trying to finish last-minute Christmas shopping before the weather got worse. One of the last-minute shoppers was Cameron Mendez, 39. She was a virtual assistant and lived the kind of isolated remote work life in her apartment. But when I looked at her digital footprint, Cameron was anything but quiet. She was a digital vigilante. Between caring for her 2 dogs, she lived for the call-out. She's even a top contributor to Facebook groups and usually spends her nights dissecting return policies and hunting for scams. According to friends and family, Cameron took small inconveniences personally and had a habit of recording confrontations anytime she felt disrespected. At first, she claimed it was for evidence. The situations usually escalated once the camera came out. Now, I'm all for accountability, but there's a big difference in collecting evidence and looking for trouble. Her sister later admitted Cameron had already been removed from multiple businesses during arguments involving coupons, refunds, and employees she accused of being rude. That night, Cameron entered the cosmetics store looking for a discounted holiday makeup bundle advertised online. The store was packed with last-minute Christmas shoppers when the cashier explained the deal only worked through online checkout. The employee offered to help place the order, but witnesses said Cameron became confrontational almost immediately. Now, most of us would have just taken the help and moved on, but Cameron saw a helpful gesture differently. She repeatedly interrupted the cashier, then pulled out her phone and started recording the workers while loudly claiming she was being disrespected. The store manager even tried explaining the policy again, but Cameron kept cutting her off as nearby shoppers stopped to watch. Then, Cameron suddenly jumped backward and screamed that an employee had assaulted her. Security footage later confirmed nobody touched her, but shoppers near the entrance only heard someone yelling that a woman had been attacked during an already crowded holiday rush. As people instinctively moved away from the front registers, confusion spread quickly through the packed store. A man carrying several shopping bags bumped into a holiday display while squeezing toward the exit, sending glass perfume bottles crashing across the tile floor. Lotion, makeup products, and broken glass spread across the walkway almost instantly as the entrance became jammed with shoppers trying to leave at the same time. Employees started yelling for people to slow down, but the front section of the store had already become chaotic. Meanwhile, Cameron was still trying to push through the crowd, the very crowd she had initiated herself. Then, she stepped directly onto spilled lotion near the broken display, and her foot slipped almost immediately. It's a split-second loss of footing. She fell backward hard enough for the back of her head to strike the tile floor near the entrance shelving. But here's the truly tragic part. The worst injuries happened after the fall. People behind her were still trying to reach the exit, and many couldn't see her on the floor beneath the collapsed displays and scattered shopping baskets. Several customers stumbled while trying to avoid broken glass and spilled products, while others were pushed forward by the crowd behind them. One witness later told investigators he thought he was stepping over debris. Within seconds, multiple people accidentally stepped onto Cameron before store employees and security finally cleared the entrance area. Paramedics arrived within minutes due to increased holiday emergency staffing nearby. Cameron was transported to a local hospital in critical condition, but doctors could not stop the internal bleeding caused by the compression injuries. The coroner later found multiple broken ribs, severe internal trauma, and signs of traumatic asphyxia. In simple terms, the pressure against her chest became so intense that she could no longer breathe properly while her internal organs were being crushed. And for me, that's such a horrifying way to die, getting crushed by the weight of the panic you helped create. Investigators later reconstructed the incident using surveillance footage and witness interviews, and ultimately concluded the panic inside the store was caused by Cameron's false assault claim, combined with crowd confusion during an already packed holiday rush. And I have to say, Cameron finally got the evidence she always wanted on her phone. just not the version she expected. No criminal charges were filed against the store because employees had repeatedly tried calming the situation, though the business was later cited for overcrowded entrance displays. This made me wonder if a few less perfume bottles or a wider aisle would have changed the outcome. Anyway, the next story starts the same way. One person escalating a small public argument until everybody around them gets dragged into it. It was July 22, 2017, in Riverside, California, and the heat had pushed most people indoors by early afternoon. Air conditioners hummed through the neighborhood, while sprinklers clicked across dry front lawns in the middle of another brutal summer weekend. Lucy Harrow was 51 years old and had lived in the same suburban duplex for nearly 20 years. According to her neighbors, she had become increasingly difficult after her divorce a few years earlier. What started as small complaints about trash bins and parking slowly turned into constant arguments with almost everyone on the block. But her biggest obsession was the mango tree growing in her neighbor's backyard. The tree leaned over the shared fence, and several large branches stretched above Lucy's patio. Most people would probably want those branches trimmed back. I know I'd be worried about the mess or the shade, but Lucy was the opposite. She insisted that anything hanging over her property legally belonged to her, especially if it's in season. The neighbor had been trying to prune the tree for months. Fruit kept falling onto both patios, branches scraped the roof during windy nights, and one large limb had started cracking after strong winds earlier that week. Eventually, the neighbor hired 2 licensed tree workers to remove several heavy branches before somebody got hurt. That Saturday afternoon, the workers arrived with ropes, chainsaws, and climbing gear. They started sectioning off part of the backyard while explaining to both homeowners that nobody should stand underneath the cutting area. Lucy came outside almost immediately, holding her phone. And what's alarming to me while reading through this was how committed she was to proving she was right. At first, she stood near the fence filming the workers while accusing them of trespassing. Then, she started yelling that the branches over her patio were her property and kept repeating it. She even threatened legal action if they cut them down. The workers repeatedly stopped what they were doing to explain the situation calmly, but every pause only made Lucy louder. Neighbors later said she kept interrupting people, talking over everyone, and moving closer every time someone asked her to back away. One worker climbed into the tree and attached a rope system to a large branch hanging over Lucy's patio. The plan was to cut it into sections and slowly lower each piece safely into the neighbor's yard. But Lucy refused to leave the drop zone and kept filming even as neighbors tried pulling her back inside. As the branch was being lowered, witnesses said Lucy suddenly rushed toward the rope line before anyone could stop her. She grabbed the rope while screaming that the workers were stealing from her property. The branch immediately twisted sideways instead of coming down straight. One end slammed into the top of the fence, bounced awkwardly, and swung back faster than anyone nearby could react. The thicker end struck Lucy across the side of her head and shoulder with enough force to throw her backward onto the concrete patio. And what makes this whole thing so frustrating to me is that the workers were actually trying to do it carefully. Witnesses later said Lucy actually tried sitting back up while still yelling at the workers. But within seconds, she became confused and started struggling to stay conscious. Blood was already visible near her ear by the time neighbors called 911. Paramedics arrived within minutes and transported her to the hospital in critical condition. Doctors found multiple skull fractures and severe bleeding around the brain. The branch impact and the fall onto the concrete caused massive head trauma that quickly increased pressure inside her skull. Lucy died later that evening. Investigators ruled the death accidental. Witnesses and cell phone footage showed workers repeatedly warning Lucy to stay away before she grabbed the lowering rope herself. Authorities concluded the branch changed direction after the rope tension was disrupted, and no charges were filed because investigators found no evidence that the crew had ignored safety procedures. Lucy's story honestly frustrates me because the branch was already under control. The whole thing only turned deadly because she refused to let it go. But this next case feels even worse because Beverly ignored warnings from people actively trying to keep her safe. It was March 8, 2018, in Portland, Oregon, after nearly a week of nonstop rain had soaked the neighborhood. Water dripped steadily from gutters while portable floodlights illuminated a partially excavated backyard behind a small craftsman-style home where emergency contractors were trying to stabilize a collapsing retaining wall before another storm arrived overnight. After 30 years in permit administration, 67-year-old Beverly Crane didn't just know the rules, she lived by them. And to me, she sounds like the kind of neighbor who treated every trash bin out of place like a personal emergency. She monitored trash pickup schedules, parked cars, fence heights, and renovation permits across the entire block. After her husband died a few years earlier, those habits only became worse. Everyone on the street knew Beverly as the local investigator who reported every minor slip-up, and from what I searched, that focus turned into a total obsession with the couple next door. She was so convinced their art studio was a scam that she spent her days glued to the fence filming workers, as if, to me, she were just one video clip away from finally proving she was right. By early March, non-stop rain had started destabilizing the slope behind both properties. Part of the retaining wall had shifted, forcing emergency contractors to bring in pumps, excavation equipment, and enclosed tarp-covered generators to stabilize the area before the hillside worsened. Multiple warning signs had already been placed around the work zone. Around 6:30 p.m., Beverly walked directly onto the muddy property carrying her phone and a small flashlight. Workers immediately recognized her. One contractor later told investigators everybody groaned the second they saw her coming down the side path because they already knew an argument was about to happen. I could almost feel that collective sigh of the crew. They're dealing with a literal landslide, and now they have to manage Beverly too. Beverly immediately started accusing the crew of performing illegal nighttime construction and damaging shared drainage systems without authorization. The site supervisor repeatedly explained the city had approved the emergency stabilization work that afternoon, but Beverly refused to listen. Instead, she walked around filming workers up close while demanding permits and contractor licenses. And honestly, this is where her ego completely took over the situation. She stopped acting like someone worried about safety and started acting like she needed to prove everyone else was incompetent. When a worker warned her to stay away from the enclosed generator area because exhaust could build up under the tarp, Beverly immediately treated the warning like evidence that they were hiding something. Witnesses later said Beverly started accusing the crew of hiding illegal equipment inside the enclosure. The supervisor warned her again that generator exhaust could build up beneath the tarp, but she ignored him, pulled part of it open, and stepped inside while recording on her phone. Workers said she kept yelling accusations at the crew until her behavior suddenly started changing. Her speech became slower, and it's a detail that truly haunts me. She stopped responding clearly to questions. One contractor later said she sounded confused, just repeating the same accusations over and over while leaning against the equipment, which is the exact moment they realized she was losing herself to the carbon monoxide. It's the most terrifying thing about the gas to me. You don't realize anything is wrong until it's already clouded your brain, and all the while, those generators would have sounded completely normal. One worker finally stepped inside the tarp after noticing Beverly had suddenly stopped talking altogether. He found her partially collapsed beside the equipment with her phone still in her hand. Workers immediately dragged her out and called emergency services while attempting CPR in the mud beside the trench pumps. Firefighters arrived within minutes and detected dangerously high carbon monoxide levels still trapped inside the enclosure. The site was cleared of direct wrongdoing because the crew's warnings were caught on tape, but I found that it wasn't a total pass for the company. OSHA still issued a minor citation for missing confined space signage on the tarp, and the city paused the project to update ventilation protocols. The studio was eventually finished, but I imagine those neighbors can't look at that backyard now without thinking of Beverly's final recording, and the next story carries that same heavy irony, where someone treats a safety warning like a personal challenge until the moment it turns deadly. But before that, let me know in the comments which case so far has frustrated you the most. And if you enjoy these breakdowns, make sure to subscribe because the next one gets even worse. It was August 31st, 2014, near Horseshoe Bay in British Columbia, and the ferry terminal was already packed from Labor Day weekend traffic. Cars sat bumper to bumper across the staging lanes while crews carefully loaded vehicles onto the ferry as small tidal movements kept shifting the vessel against the dock. Lorraine Pike was 54 years old and worked as an insurance claims adjuster in Vancouver. Co-workers later described her as the type of person who argued with almost everyone when things didn't go her way. Whether it's a restaurant staff, store employees, or receptionists, it didn't really matter. And according to multiple people at the terminal that day, she acted like the entire ferry lineup existed just to annoy her personally. She arrived in a white Lexus SUV expecting to catch the next crossing, but holiday traffic had already pushed wait times past an hour. At first, she stayed inside the vehicle, looking irritated but calm enough. That changed once workers started redirecting cars into holding lanes for the next sailing. Lorraine jumped out and marched toward an attendant, loudly demanding to be moved to the front. When the employee explained that loading depended on vehicle balance, she just talked over him before storming back to her car. 20 minutes later, loading finally started. Most drivers followed the instruction to board slowly while the ferry stabilized against the tide, but Lorraine didn't. Instead, witnesses watched her suddenly pull the Lexus out of line and drive along the outer edge of the staging area, bypassing several waiting vehicles. People immediately started honking. One dock worker even waved both arms at her to stop, while another hurried toward the ramp entrance. But before either employee could even reach her, Lorraine rolled down the driver's side window and started yelling again. Witnesses later said Lorraine kept calling the terminal workers incompetent and insisting she wasn't waiting another hour. But by then, the workers weren't yelling because of the argument anymore. They were yelling because the ferry still hadn't fully settled against the dock. As a delivery van ahead started boarding, Lorraine suddenly accelerated and tried squeezing around it. At almost the same moment, a passing wake shifted the ferry sideways a few inches. Her front tire slipped off the ramp first. The SUV jerked hard. She overcorrected, and the entire vehicle dropped nose first into the water. But the worst part is that the impact itself wasn't what killed her. The Lexus remained partially above water for several seconds, and witnesses could see Lorraine moving inside as water rushed through the engine compartment. Crew members threw flotation rings, but the SUV sank fast. Investigators later believed Lorraine lost crucial seconds trying to restart or reverse the SUV instead of escaping immediately. It's a haunting thought to me that she might have been trying to save the car in the very moments she needed to save herself. In the aftermath, her family explored legal action, but surveillance footage showed Lorraine ignoring stop signals and accelerating toward the ramp despite repeated warnings. Her insurance company later denied the claims, stating she knowingly ignored safety instructions. Lorraine's case is a tragic reminder that the rules we find most frustrating are often the only things standing between us and a disaster we can't take back. And the next story feels just as brutal because, again, it starts with somebody refusing to let a tiny argument end. It was November 14, 2016, near Queens Boulevard in New York City, and cold rain had already turned the evening commute into a disaster. Traffic barely moved, buses were overcrowded from a subway delay, and every time the doors opened, freezing rain blew inside with another group of exhausted passengers. Marlene Voss was 46 years old and worked as a payroll clerk in Midtown, a job that required staring at spreadsheets and enforcing rigid boundaries all day. She rode the same MTA route home almost every evening, and regular commuters already recognized her before the argument even started. That night, the bus was packed shoulder to shoulder by the time it reached Queens Boulevard. Wet jackets rubbed together in the aisle, while several older passengers stood holding support rails because there were no open seats left anywhere, except for the one beside Marlene, where her shopping bag sat instead. And I can already predict the tension on a crowded bus when someone decides their groceries matter more than a neighbor's comfort. At one point, an older man quietly asked if he could sit down. Marlene pulled the bags closer to herself and said the seat was taken without even looking at him. The man glanced at the empty spot for a second, then awkwardly moved back into the crowded aisle. A few stops later, a construction worker boarded carrying a heavy tool backpack. Witnesses later described him as exhausted and soaked from the rain. After scanning the crowded bus, he politely asked if she could move the bags. But instead of answering normally, Marlene instantly pulled out her phone and shoved it toward his face while loudly accusing him of harassing her. And this part really stood out to me. The guy wasn't yelling, threatening her, or even being rude. He looked exhausted and just wanted somewhere to sit after standing in the rain with a heavy tool bag on his back. But the second nearby passengers started paying attention, Marlene stopped treating it like a normal conversation and started performing the argument instead. The construction worker backed off and raised his hands, but Marlene kept filming, shouting that she was being threatened. By now, the other passengers were losing their patience, seeing elderly riders standing while shopping bags took up a seat. One woman finally told Marlene she was being ridiculous, while another muttered that if she hated people so much, she shouldn't be on the bus. But instead of backing down, Marlene seemed to lean into it, using their anger as fuel to get even louder. Marlene stood up while still recording and started yelling at multiple people at once. Witnesses later said she followed the construction worker farther down the aisle with the phone inches from his face while accusing him of intimidating her. The bus driver finally pulled over near an intersection and opened the front doors. He warned Marlene to either calm down or leave the bus. Instead, she marched toward the front, still filming, and got directly into the face of a man near the door who had called her selfish. She shoved him first, and to me, it's such a senseless escalation. Witnesses later said she kept demanding he repeat what he said while holding the phone inches from it. The man tried stepping away, but Marlene shoved him first. Not hard enough to hurt him, just enough that he instinctively pushed her backward to create space, and that single moment killed her. The front bus steps were already slick from rainwater tracked in by dozens of passengers. When Marlene stumbled backward, the heel of her boot slid against the wet metal edge near the doorway. Her balance disappeared instantly. She fell sideways through the open bus doors and directly into the traffic lane beside the stopped bus. At the same moment, a compact SUV was passing alongside the vehicle. Witnesses later said the driver barely had time to react because Marlene suddenly came out from the blind spot beside the bus. The SUV struck her before braking farther down the street. Paramedics arrived quickly, but the injuries were catastrophic. The autopsy later found multiple rib fractures, severe blunt force trauma to the chest and abdomen, a collapsed lung, and massive internal bleeding. Police later reviewed bus surveillance footage, nearby traffic cameras, and Marlene's own phone, which was still recording near the curb after the crash. The footage showed Marlene shoving the passenger first before he pushed her back to create space. The man was briefly detained, but prosecutors declined to file charges after reviewing the footage and witness statements. Investigators concluded the fatal injuries happened when Marlene slipped on the wet bus steps and fell into traffic.